Captain Alina Reyes maintained perfect composure as the holographic projection of the stellar governing body representative towered above the United Nations Emergency Assembly. The alien's translucent form, vaguely humanoid but with too many joints and a head that seemed to shift shape with each movement, flickered as it spoke. Your species has been assessed and classified as Category 4, technologically emergent but culturally underdeveloped. The stellar governing body hereby claims administrative authority over your system under Galactic Protocol 357b. Whispers erupted throughout the assembly hall. Rise, a veteran of 3 space conflicts and former diplomatic liaison to Mars, felt her pulse quicken but kept her expression neutral. The alien continued, seemingly unaware or unconcerned with the growing tension in the room. Earth will surrender 30% of all planetary resources, including rare minerals, water reserves, and biological specimens. You will dismantle all military facilities beyond your atmosphere. You will accept SGB oversight of all technological development. Compliance ensures protection. Resistance ensures regulatory action. Secretary General Hassan nodded to Reyes. This was why they'd selected her. 20 years of crisis negotiation had taught her to buy time when outgunned. Esteemed representative, she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation, we are honored by the stellar governing body's interest in our humble system. Your generous proposal requires thorough consideration by our planetary leadership. We request a standard diplomatic interval of 7 solar cycles before delivering our formal response. The alien's form rippled with what might have been irritation or amusement. Impossible to tell with their unfamiliar biology. You have 4 cycles, it stated flatly. The projection vanished. Immediately, the assembly erupted into chaos. Reyes slipped away from the podium and followed Secretary General Hassan through a hidden exit that led to Bunker Zero, Earth's most secure facility, buried beneath the Alps. Do you think they bought it? Hassan asked as the elevator descended rapidly. They're arrogant, Reyes replied. That works in our favor. They see us as primitives scrambling to understand their magnificent offer. In reality, she left the thought unfinished as the elevator doors opened. Before them stretched a command center humming with activity. Generals, admirals, and scientific directors from every major nation stood huddled around holographic displays of the solar system. Massive alien vessels, 14 in total, had positioned themselves at strategic points throughout Earth's orbital space. Admiral Jackson Hayes, commander of Earth's Unified Space Defense Force, approached them. His weathered face looked grimmer than usual. Glad you stalled them, Captain, he said to Reyes. Project Prometheus is ready, but we need every hour possible to deploy from Neptune's shadow. Will it work? Secretary General Hassan asked, eyeing the simulation of Earth's experimental fleet, vessels smaller than the aliens, but engineered with technology even most world leaders hadn't known existed until today. It has to, Hayes replied. But we need help from every corner of human civilization. The Russians have quantum shielding we need. The Chinese perfected laser technology we can't match. The Indian AI systems are years ahead of anyone else's. Reyes watched as lifetime enemies suddenly collaborated, sharing technological secrets long hidden from each other. The sight was both inspiring and terrifying. It had taken an existential threat to unify humanity. A junior officer approached with a tablet displaying a message. Sir, the lunar colonies and Mars outposts have confirmed. They're fully committed. Every ship, every weapon, every resource. Hayes nodded. Begin Operation Defiance. And pray to whatever gods you believe in that we're not already too late. In orbit above them, the SGB vessels waited, their commanders confident in the outcome. They had never encountered a species that successfully rejected their demands. They didn't expect Earth would be the first. They were wrong. Bunker Zero transformed into humanity's war room during the next 72 hours. Leaders who had previously threatened each other with annihilation now sat side by side, united by a common enemy. The chamber's central holographic display showed real-time movements of the SGB vessels, their massive silhouettes dwarfing the International Space Station as they performed intimidation passes. Admiral Jackson Hayes stepped onto the elevated platform, his uniform bearing the hastily created insignia of Earth's Unified Defense Command. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be brief. Our intelligence teams have completed their analysis of the SGV vessels," he said, manipulating the holographic display. The alien ships exploded into component schematics. Despite their technological advantage, they have vulnerabilities. Significant ones. The assembled leaders leaned forward. Hope was a dangerous commodity, but Hayes offered it nonetheless. The SGB relies on rigid hierarchical command structures. Their vessels are designed for overwhelming force, not adaptability. Most critically, their shields operate on predictable energy frequencies. Dr. Leila Rodriguez, Earth's leading quantum physicist, joined Hayes on the platform. "Their shield technology is impressive but fundamentally flawed," she explained, highlighting specific sections of the alien tech. "They designed it to withstand conventional weaponry, missiles, lasers, kinetic projectiles. But our quantum disruption technology approaches warfare from an entirely different paradigm. Project Prometheus," Hayes continued, "was developed as a theoretical defense against unknown threats. We never imagined we'd need to deploy it so soon." The hologram shifted to display sleek vessels unlike anything in Earth's current arsenal, smaller than the SGB ships, but bristling with technology decades ahead of public knowledge. "Each nation represented in this room has contributed to this project in some way, whether you knew it or not," Hayes said. "Russian quantum shielding, Brazilian propulsion systems, Japanese artificial intelligence, South African drone swarm technology. Now we bring it all together." "How many ships do we have?" asked the Chinese premier, her expression grave. 17 completed vessels at our Neptune facility," Hayes replied. "Another 23 in various stages of construction that can be operational within days if we divert all resources." "And their fleet numbers?" asked the American president. 14 visible vessels in our system. Unknown reinforcements beyond the heliopause." The room absorbed this information with grim determination. Secretary General Hassan spoke next. "We need to coordinate our ground and orbital defenses as well, if they attack before our fleet is ready." Captain Reyes, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. "They won't," she said with quiet confidence. "I've been studying their communication patterns. They're waiting for our response, expecting capitulation. Their species doesn't understand our capacity for resistance." "How can you be so sure?" asked the Russian president. Reyes pointed to data scrolling across a secondary display. "Their communications refer to us using linguistic markers that translate roughly as resource bearers or asset planets. They don't see us as opponents. They see us as inventory." Hayes nodded grimly. "That's their mistake. We've spent our entire history fighting. Against nature, against each other. Now we'll show them what happens when humanity fights together." He expanded the hologram to show the entire solar system. "We need 3 more days to bring our Neptune facility to full deployment capacity. Captain Reyes will continue diplomatic delays. Meanwhile, we quietly position our conventional forces to protect civilian populations." The European chancellor looked unconvinced. "Even with Project Prometheus, we're outnumbered and outgunned." Hayes allowed himself a thin smile. "Chancellor, throughout human history, revolution and innovation have always come from the underdog. The SGB has conquered 1,000 worlds and never faced significant resistance. They'd forgotten how to adapt." He gestured to the assembled leaders. "We adapt every day just to survive on our own planet." As the meeting continued, deep in Neptune's shadow, Earth's secret fleet awakened. Humanity's last, best hope for survival. The assembly of Earth's defense force happened with unprecedented speed, while Captain Reyes continued diplomatic theater, requesting clarifications on resource quotas and protectorate status details. The real work occurred far from SGV sensors. Behind Jupiter's massive bulk, the scattered vessels of humanity's spacefaring nations converge. Mining ships from the asteroid belt, retrofitted with hastily mounted railguns. Lunar patrol cruisers bearing experimental electromagnetic pulse generators. Mars Defense Force interceptors, small but deadly, now upgraded with quantum communication arrays that the SGB couldn't detect. Captain Samantha Wells supervised the integration of these disparate vessels into a cohesive fighting force from the bridge of the UDS Defiance, one of the first Prometheus-class ships to reach the rendezvous point. "Status report," she demanded, watching the tactical display as another cluster of vessels arrived. "Brazilian mining consortium ships have completed weapons installation," Captain, reported Lieutenant Commander Miguel Santos. "Their captains report ready for combat drills." Wells nodded. 2 weeks ago, she had been court-martialed for exceeding her authority during a border dispute with these same Brazilian ships. Now those captains followed her orders without question. "The Chinese quantum shield generators?" she asked. "Online and synchronized across 67% of the fleet," Santos replied. "Dr. Rodriguez's team is working around the clock to integrate the remaining vessels." On Earth, factory floors that once produced civilian aircraft now manufactured spacecraft components. Engineers worked triple shifts, catching sleep under their workstations. In orbit, space stations designed for scientific research transformed into military staging areas. The SGB noticed none of this. Their sensors, programmed to detect conventional weapons and energy signatures, remained blind to Earth's quantum-based technologies. Their intelligence reports classified the increased radio chatter as primitive species experiencing panic response. In a repurposed cargo hold of the Defiance, Wells addressed the most unusual combat unit in human history. 50 soldiers stood at attention. Former enemies, now brothers and sisters in arms. Russian cosmonauts alongside American Space Marines. Chinese orbital specialists next to Indian combat engineers. Nigerian drone operators with Israeli cyber warfare experts. "You represent the best of your respective forces," Wells said, pacing before them. "Each of you brings combat expertise the others lack. You've spent your careers training to fight each other. Now you'll fight together." Commander Leonid Volkov, formerly of Russian Orbital Command, stepped forward. "Permission to address the troops, Captain." Wells nodded, curious. Volkov had been her adversary in 3 separate border incidents. "I once killed 4 American Marines during the Luna conflict," Volkov said bluntly. "2 of you in this room lost comrades to my squad." He paused, his weathered face solemn. "Today, I would die for any of you without hesitation, because Earth is not Russian or American or Chinese. Earth is humanity's home, and no one takes our home." The silence that followed held more power than any cheer. On the Defiance's bridge, Admiral Hayes contacted Wells through a secure channel. "Captain, our intelligence suggests the SGB will lose patience within 24 hours. Are your strike teams ready?" Wells glanced at her tactical display, showing hundreds of vessels now moving in coordinated formation. The terrestrial armada, born of desperation, forged through cooperation that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. "Not completely, Admiral," she answered honestly, "but ready enough." In Earth's orbit, the SGB commander prepared his ultimatum. The deadline approached, and these primitives would learn the cost of delay. His species had conquered worlds for 10,000 cycles. This would be no different. He was wrong. The SGB compliance vessel Inevitable Order detached from the main fleet with methodical precision. Its destination: the Olympus Mons settlement on Mars. Population 4,213. The settlement had been chosen deliberately, small enough to make an example of, but large enough that its destruction would demonstrate the consequences of defiance to Earth's leaders. Primitive species respond to visual stimulus. Commander Vexorn explained to his subordinates. They require education through observable consequences. The massive warship, flanked by 6 escort vessels, moved toward Mars with absolute confidence. Their intelligence indicated minimal defenses at the settlement. A handful of outdated automated turrets, nothing that could threaten vessels of their caliber. In the Olympus Mons Command Center, Colony Director Dr. Maya Patel received the emergency transmission from Earth Defense Command. "They're coming for us," she announced to her staff, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her chest. "Evacuation protocols are now active." "Evacuation to where?" asked her deputy director. "There's nowhere on Mars to hide from those ships." Dr. Patil allowed herself a small smile. Who said anything about hiding? 16 minutes later, the SGB vessels took up orbital positions above Olympus Mons. Their weapons systems activated, targeting the colony's life support infrastructure. Commander Vexorn transmitted the standard warning. "Resistance has been noted. Consequences follow. Your species will learn obedience." What happened next would be replayed in military academies across the galaxy for centuries. From the shadow of Mars' smaller moon Deimos, previously undetected by SGB sensors, the first strike team of the terrestrial armada emerged. 8 vessels, each a fraction of the size of the SGB warships, accelerated at velocities the alien targeting systems classified as aerodynamically impossible. Captain Wells' voice cut through the comm channel. "Strike Team Avalanche. Execute Pattern Delta. Target their propulsion relays, just like we practiced." The human vessels executed a corkscrew maneuver that scattered the SGB's targeting algorithms. On the Inevitable Orders command deck, warnings flashed as sensors detected the approaching ships. "Primitive vessels detected," reported the tactical officer. "Minimal threat assessment. Shields at standard configuration." Commander Vexorn barely acknowledged the report. These humans were desperate, sending a handful of ships to their doom. He would crush them and then proceed with the colony's punishment. The first quantum disruptor hit caught the SGB completely by surprise. The technology operated on principles their scientists had theorized, but never weaponized, directly manipulating quantum fields to collapse shield harmonics from the inside. "Shields failing," barked the tactical officer, his composure cracking. Unknown weapon type. The human vessels moved with uncanny coordination, as though each pilot anticipated the other's actions without communication. In reality, the quantum mesh network developed by Dr. Rodriguez allowed for instantaneous tactical updates between all ships, faster than even the SGB's advanced communication systems. Inside the colony, 10-year-old Zhou Chen pressed her face against the reinforced viewport, her tablet recording as humanity fought its first interstellar battle. Her father had helped design the colony's hidden defensive systems. She knew they weren't helpless. "Look at them move," she whispered in awe as a human vessel, no larger than a passenger shuttle, executed a maneuver that brought it directly beneath an SGV escort ship. The smaller vessel fired upward, its quantum disruptors collapsing the alien ship's engines. The battle lasted 9 minutes. When it ended, 3 SGB dreadnoughts drifted powerless, their propulsion and weapons systems offline. 2 escort vessels had been destroyed outright. The remaining ships retreated, broadcasting distress signals. Commander Vexorn, his ship now dead in space, faced a reality his species had not encountered in 1,000 years: defeat. The footage captured by young Zhou Chen would transmit across Earth's networks within hours. Humanity had drawn first blood, and the galaxy would never be the same. Zhou Chen's footage from Mars spread across Earth like wildfire. Unedited, raw, and authentic, it showed humanity not just surviving but prevailing against overwhelming odds. Government censors, initially concerned about panic, quickly realized the video's value. Hope was a weapon they desperately needed. In the deepest level of Bunker Zero, Dr. Marcus Thompson hunched over a holographic interface, his fingers dancing across virtual controls. 5 years ago, he'd been serving a life sentence for the most devastating cyber attack in history. Now, he led Earth's digital offensive against the SGB. Their entire network architecture is fundamentally flawed. Thompson explained to Admiral Hayes and Captain Rice as they observed his work. They built systems assuming absolute authority would never be questioned. Thompson's team had discovered something astonishing. The SGB's communication network extended across thousands of star systems, but operated on protocols that prioritized efficiency over security. Conquest had made them complacent. "Look here," Thompson pointed to data streams flowing through his interface. "Their authentication systems literally don't have a concept for rebellion in their security protocols. They've conquered so many compliant species that they've forgotten what resistance looks like." Admiral Hayes studied the information. "Can we exploit this?" Thompson's smile was not entirely reassuring. "We already are." Across the galaxy, SGB communication channels began experiencing unprecedented disruptions. Critical command transmissions were replaced with footage from Mars. Supply requisitions transformed into evidence of SGB atrocities against other species. Military deployment orders mysteriously rerouted ships to empty sectors. But Thompson's masterpiece was far more insidious. His team had identified 5 subjugated species whose worlds showed signs of unrest. Using data mined from SGB archives, they crafted tailored messages for each civilization. "We're not just fighting our own battle," Captain Reyes observed as she reviewed Thompson's work. "We're starting a galactic revolution." Thompson nodded. "The SGB has been bleeding these worlds dry for centuries. All they needed was proof that resistance was possible." The Corvesh, amphibious beings from a water world in the Cygnus sector, were the first to rebel. Their uprising began 3 days after receiving Thompson's data package, containing Zhou Chen's video alongside technical specifications of SGB vulnerabilities. The Praxi followed 2 days later, their crystalline communication matrices flashing with human-provided intelligence on SGB patrol patterns. Then came the Novan Collective, the Duran Hierarchy, and the Whisper Enclaves, each rebellion precisely timed to maximize SGB resource division. Admiral Hayes watched the strategic display as reports of uprisings multiplied across SGB territory. "They never anticipated fighting a multi-front war," he noted. In Earth orbit, Captain Rice, now promoted to Admiral, addressed the assembled representatives of these newly rebellious species via quantum-encrypted channels that the SGB couldn't intercept. "We don't ask you to fight our battles," she told them, her expression solemn. "We ask only that you fight for yourselves. Join us or stay neutral. But know this, the age of SGB dominance is ending." A Corvesh elder, his translucent skin shimmering with bioluminescent emotion, responded first. "For 800 cycles, my people have harvested our oceans for SGB masters. We watched our children starve while tribute ships took our food to distant worlds. Today, those tribute ships burn in our harbors." One by one, the representatives of 5 species pledged solidarity, not out of love for humans, whom they barely understood, but out of recognition that this unprecedented moment offered freedom long thought impossible. Dr. Thompson, watching from his workstation, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. "The most powerful weapon in the universe isn't a doomsday device," he murmured. "It's hope where none existed before." In the SGB Central Command, chaos reigned as reports of simultaneous rebellions flooded in from across their carefully ordered domain. The unthinkable was happening. Their empire was beginning to fracture. The SGB High Council convened an emergency session for the first time in 300 cycles. Reports of simultaneous rebellions across 5 sectors, combined with the humiliating defeat at Mars, demanded unprecedented action. "This contagion of defiance must be excised," declared High Counselor Zexpon, the eldest of their species. "The humans have revealed themselves as a Class 1 threat, a civilization capable of destabilizing established order." The Council's decision was unanimous. Earth would face the full might of the SGB Central Fleet. 97 warships, each dwarfing the vessels defeated at Mars, converged on the Sol system with a single mission: eradicate human resistance and establish absolute control. Admiral Hayes received the intelligence report with grim determination. "They're coming in force," he told the assembled commanders of the terrestrial armada. "Our victory at Mars has provoked exactly the response we needed." Captain Wells raised an eyebrow. "We needed them to send their entire fleet." Hayes nodded. "We needed them angry, predictable, and committed to a single target." He activated the strategic display, highlighting Jupiter's largest moon. "We've prepared a welcome for them at Europa." For 2 weeks, under cover of Europa's icy surface, engineers from 17 nations had worked feverishly to install quantum disruptor nodes throughout Jupiter's powerful magnetic field. The gas giant's natural radiation would mask their energy signatures until activation. "This is Operation Prometheus," Hayes explained. "One shot to cripple their fleet." As the SGB Armada approached Jupiter, Admiral Ries transmitted Earth's final message. "Your campaign of conquest ends here. Withdraw from our system, or face the consequences." The SGB commander's response was brief. "Extinction awaits." Hayes gave the order from his flagship, UDS Defiance, positioned behind Europa. "Initiate Prometheus Protocol." Dr. Rodriguez, monitoring the quantum network, confirmed. Disruptor nodes activating. Synchronization at 97%. Jupiter's magnetosphere is amplifying the effect beyond projected parameters. Throughout Jupiter's vast magnetic field, invisible to conventional sensors, quantum disturbances rippled outward. The principle was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of attacking the SGB ships directly, the disruptors altered the quantum field around them, rendering their navigation and targeting systems useless. On the SGB command vessel, alarms blared as systems failed, cascading throughout the fleet. "Navigational control offline," reported a frantic officer. "Weapons targeting disabled. Communication with auxiliary vessels disrupted." The SGB commander watched in disbelief as his mighty armada drifted into disarray, ships colliding as maneuvering thrusters fired randomly. This was the moment the terrestrial armada had prepared for. From positions throughout the Jovian system, human vessels emerge, smaller than their opponents but perfectly coordinated through the quantum mesh network that remained unaffected by the disruption field. "Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth," Hayes transmitted as the human fleet moved into attack position. "We're fighting for every species that's ever been bullied into submission by these glorified cosmic landlords." The battle that followed would later be called the Symphony of Europa by human historians. Each vessel in the terrestrial armada executed precisely coordinated attacks, targeting the now vulnerable SGB ships with surgical precision. Conventional weapons would have bounced harmlessly off SGB shields. Quantum disruptors bypassed them entirely. Lieutenant Commander Akira Tanaka, piloting the swift attack vessel Sakura, led a squadron of 12 ships against an SGB dreadnought. "Pattern Hydra, execute now," he ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. His squadron split into 4 triads, each attacking from a different vector, confusing the SGB defensive algorithms that expected conventional assault patterns. When an SGB energy burst threatened to destroy one of the human vessels, Tanaka didn't hesitate. He interposed his ship between the blast and his comrade, his quantum shields barely absorbing the impact. This scene repeated countless times across the battlefield, human pilots willingly risking themselves to protect their squadmates, a concept utterly foreign to the hierarchical SGB command structure, where lesser vessels were considered expendable. Within hours, the mighty SGB fleet lay in ruins. 23 ships destroyed, 49 disabled, the remainder retreating in disarray. The Battle of Europa marked the turning point in humanity's desperate defense and sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. News of the Europa disaster spread through the SGB hierarchy with unprecedented speed. For the first time in millennia, the unthinkable had occurred. A pre-FTL civilization had not merely resisted but thoroughly defeated the SGB's premier military force. In the governing chamber on the SGB capital world, the 7 founding species held emergency deliberations. The Velaran, oldest among them, broke centuries of political convention by speaking first. This catastrophe demands reassessment, the Valoran representative stated, its crystalline exoskeleton pulsing with agitation. The humans have demonstrated capabilities beyond our assessment parameters. The Nexid representative hissed contempt. One primitive species achieves a temporary tactical advantage. We have sufficient resources to crush them utterly. At what cost? Countered the Valoran. 5 subject worlds in rebellion. Our central fleet decimated. Our communication networks compromised. These patterns suggest systemic failure of our approach. Aboard a nondescript freighter in the neutral Proxima Centauri system, Admiral Alina Reyes entered a secure compartment to find herself face-to-face with a Valoran diplomat. The meeting, arranged through channels so secretive that even Admiral Hayes knew only the broadest details, represented a stunning development. Your species continues to defy probabilistic models, the Valoran observed, its translucent appendages arranging themselves in what Reyes recognized from briefings as a gesture of respectful confusion. When defeat is mathematically certain, you still fight. And somehow, you win. It defies our understanding of intelligent behavior. Reyes maintained her diplomatic composure, though her heart raced at the implications of this meeting. Perhaps your models fail to account for certain variables, such as hope, desperation, the knowledge that surrender means the end of everything we value. The Valoran's crystalline surface rippled, their equivalent of contemplative silence. The stellar governing body has existed for 12,000 cycles. We have incorporated 347 species into our hierarchy. None have resisted as you have. Reyes allowed herself a small smile. Humans have a saying. The cornered animal fights the hardest. Yet your fighting exhibits patterns beyond mere desperation. Your victory at Europa displayed strategic brilliance. Your information warfare shows unprecedented insight into psychological vulnerabilities. Most disturbing, your species cooperates despite internal differences that should make such cooperation impossible. The conversation continued for hours, culminating in an extraordinary proposal. The Valoran would withdraw from active hostilities against Earth and open secret negotiations. In exchange, they sought human assistance with the rebellions now threatening to destabilize their core worlds. As Reyes returned to Earth, similar approaches came from 3 other SGB member species. The Moregi, masters of commerce, offered trade concessions. The Kethlar proposed technological exchange. The Harmony Cluster suggested mutual defense arrangements. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Mitchell found himself in the unexpected position of leading these sensitive negotiations. As Earth's foremost xenolinguist, he understood the cultural nuances behind each proposal. More importantly, he approached the table without the rage that consumed many human negotiators. "How can you speak so calmly to them?" demanded his aide after a particularly tense session with the Moregi. "They approved the attacks that killed your family in the Sydney demonstration." Mitchell's eyes reflected grief, but his voice remained steady. "Revenge is easy. Building something better afterward. That's the real test of humanity." In SGB space, the fractures widened daily. Species that had coexisted in rigid hierarchy for millennia now questioned the fundamental premise of their union. The stellar governing body, once seemingly omnipotent, found itself struggling to maintain internal cohesion while facing unprecedented external threats. The Valoran representative, returning from their secret mission, addressed the ruling council with stark clarity. "We initiated this conflict expecting routine subjugation. We face instead existential crisis. These humans do not merely fight our ships. They fight our very concept of galactic order." 1 year after the SGB's ultimatum, the Grand Assembly Hall of the newly formed Galactic Cooperative hummed with activity. Representatives from 37 species gathered on neutral ground. A space station constructed in orbit around Proxima Centauri, incorporating architectural elements from all member worlds. Admiral Alina Reyes, now Earth's first galactic ambassador, smoothed her formal diplomatic uniform as she prepared to address the historic gathering. The journey from military officer to diplomat had been unexpected, but her unique combination of strategic thinking and ethical clarity had made her humanity's natural choice for the role. "Nervous?" asked Admiral Hayes, who stood beside her at the entrance to the chamber. Rice smiled. "Terrified. Facing SGB warships seems simple compared to this." "You'll do fine," Hayes assured her. "You helped build this coalition. Now you just need to remind them why it matters." The remnants of the SGB, now reduced to 8 loyal species from their original 32, had been forced to accept a peace treaty that recognized Earth's sovereignty and humanity's right to colonize their solar system without interference. More remarkably, they had accepted fundamental reforms to their governance structure, abandoning the hierarchical model that had defined them for millennia. As Reyes took her position at the central podium, she surveyed the assembly. Former enemies sat alongside new allies. Species that had never communicated directly now engaged in animated discussions through translator devices based on technology developed by Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's team. "Distinguished representatives," Reyes began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the chamber. "1 year ago today, my species faced extinction at the hands of a power that considered us primitive, expendable, and destined for subjugation." She paused, making eye contact with the Velaran delegate. "We stand here now not because we defeated that power through superior strength, but because we demonstrated that cooperation yields greater benefits than domination." The assembly hall fell silent as she continued. "We didn't fight just to be left alone. We fought because we believe every sentient species deserves self-determination. The stars belong to all of us, not as territory to be claimed, but as a frontier to be explored together." Her proposal for the Galactic Cooperative outlined a genuinely collaborative governing structure. Technology exchange programs would ensure no single species maintained overwhelming advantages. Trade agreements would distribute resources equitably. Cultural exchange initiatives would foster understanding between vastly different forms of consciousness. Most revolutionary was the Intervention Limitation Protocol, a firm restriction on interference with developing civilizations until they achieved independent interstellar capability. When the vote came, 35 species supported the framework. Only 2 abstained, former SGB hardliners who remained suspicious of this new approach. As the assembly concluded, the Velaran representative approached Reyes. "Remember when we thought you were primitive?" The crystalline being asked, its voice translated by Mitchell's ingenious device. "I suspect humanity is just getting started." In the observation gallery, Captain Samantha Wells stood beside Dr. Marcus Thompson and Admiral Hayes, watching the proceedings with a mixture of pride and wonder. "Think they have any idea what they're in for once humans start really exploring?" Wells asked with a wry smile. Hayes chuckled, the scars from Europa still fresh on his face. "Not a clue. But they'll learn. We're not just good at fighting. We're even better at making friends." Dr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "That's always been our superpower, hasn't it? Adaptability. We spent millennia trying to kill each other, but when faced with external threats, we unify with remarkable speed." As Earth's new diplomatic corps prepared for their assignments across the galaxy, humanity began its true ascension among the stars. Not as conquerors, but as the unlikely architects of a more just cosmic order. On Mars, young Zhou-Chen, now 11, looked up at the night sky with her father. "Do you think there are more civilizations out there?" she asked. "Beyond what even the SGB discovered?" Her father smiled. "Without doubt. And thanks to what happened this year, they'll meet humanity as friends and partners, not as subjects." Zhou considered this, then grinned. "Good. The universe is way more interesting that way."